like to thank you all for taking the time out to join us today. James has very kindly agreed to give a talk. I know you've all expressed a lot of interest. Got quite a big crowd, so I'll skip the introductions and just hand it over to James.
Cool. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Hi, James.
Hi. I'm James Hattersley-Dykes. You may remember me from such developer jobs as Sykes Cottages, the BBC, etc. Oh, there's a few more people coming in the waiting room. Sam, do you want to?
I'll let those in as a.
Just keep them coming. Keep them coming. Yeah. So yeah, today's talk is about static websites and a bit of a journey that I've been on learning about them. I'm not going to admit to being an expert in this by any means. There's loads of good stuff out there, but I just want to sort of talk you through what I've learned, some use cases, and where I think they'd be really, really good to use, and perhaps think about your next project. So that's why the title of the talk is Why Your Next Site Should Be Static. I'm getting the right window. Okay, so who am I? You may know me. If you don't, okay, there's a nice picture of my wife and kids. I currently work at the BBC, so I've worked my way back in there. I was previously at the BBC and previously at very.co.uk and Sykes Cottages as well. I'm a big AWS fanboy, love continuous delivery, TDD, and now I'm really into Gatsby and GraphQL and all that kind of stuff. So been around quite a while, and yeah, this is a bit of a sort of, here's a bit of stuff I know about static sites. So let's dive in. So on the web, you're all seasoned web developers, hopefully, and know what the web looks like. But for the purpose of this talk, you have a client and a server, and what usually happens is the client asks for stuff. So it's, hey, I need a page, I need an image, da, 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 da. And the server goes, yep, there you go, there's your image, there's your page, etc., and gets stuff back. But that model is great. It's been like that since the dawn of the internet. And over time, we've started to do more and more stuff on that server. We've had .NET, we've had Java, Spring, all that kind of good stuff. We've had PHP on the server, generating pages and talking to databases and so on and so on. So there's lots of complicated stuff you can do on the server. Whoops, sorry. So yeah, that server not only, hey Paul, thanks for joining.
All right, no worries.
So yeah, that server is great. It's a great model. It works really well, but it's difficult to scale. You need load balancers in there. You might need more than one database. You'll need tons of servers. You'll need to host your static assets elsewhere. That kind of thing. It's there's a lot of work involved in scaling it. So I want to introduce static sites a little bit and talk about like how we can get around some of those problems. So a brief history of websites according to my career, and it fits perfectly with the context of this talk. So back in the 90s, I was like a 15, 16-year-old lad. Used to make HTML pages about dance CJ software and stuff like that, and music, and thought it was all the bee's knees. I had a CD-ROM full of GIFs that you could upload with like the Under Construction Man and so on. It was ace. The website had frames, all that kind of good stuff. And you just used to copy files up onto an FTP server individually. It was magic. Then I started to discover booze and missed this whole early noughties period. So in that time, people were building Perl scripts and starting to do dynamic stuff on the server. As I said there, you'd find directories called CGI bin, and there were some cool scripts in there that you could use and send emails and all that kind of good stuff. Fast forward to sort of 2000 to 2005, ASP.NET 1 was brought out. PHP was version 4. I actually remember being given a book called Sam's Teach Yourself PHP in 24 hours, which I read over the course of about 3 weeks, because all lies, those kind of books. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on, and it was the early versions of .NET was where I really started to get into sort of that back-end server-side programming stuff and do some stuff with C#1. That was one of my first ever jobs, working for EDS, doing some C#1. That was interesting. There was stuff kicking off around REST and SOAP and being able to talk business to business. So it was an exciting world, but it was all very, very back end, you know, on a server, etc. You go then taking into the next phase of sort of 2006 to 2010. You know, WordPress took off in that sort of time. AWS started to, you know, gain traction and become the way to deploy your applications a little bit. People started asking like, oh, what's this cloud thing? You know, it's really, really scalable. And you had something monumental, jQuery and Ajax. I don't think people give these two technologies enough credit, but that kind of gave birth to this whole Web 2.0 and started to bring more and more apps off the server side and into the browser, into the client side a lot more. And then from there, JavaScript just went nuts. So you had Ryan Dahl releasing Node.js, and you know, started to get people calling themselves full stack engineers, which is basically just like a cheap generalist developer. I think, you know, no one's a specialist anymore. They just be everything for as cheap as possible, please. Facebook brought out Angular in the sort of between 2010 2018. Serverless technology took off. It was, did I say Facebook brought out Angular? Sorry, Facebook brought out React and Angular was launched at the same time, sorry. Yeah, so microservices, serverless, all that good stuff starts to come out. You know, there's some really, really cool stuff you know, happening in the world of the web. And like this is only kind of 20 years worth of stuff. The evolution of the web is amazing. And now sort of 2018 to now, there's, you know, you've got all your GraphQL, everything's on the cloud. You know, you get people looking at you funny if you still host stuff on-prem. It's an amazing space to work. And you're also starting to see a resurgence of static sites through something that is called the Jamstack. However, it's not all straightforward. As this, one of my heroes at the moment is this guy, Nader Dabit. He works for AWS. And he summed it all up quite nicely in this tweet. You know, software development is easy. All you have to know is version control, databases, front-end frameworks, back-end frameworks, testing, mobile APIs. And the word I've blocked out there is a swear word. So yeah, it's complicated. It's a big problem space to work in. And I think that sums it up beautifully, that tweet. Cool. So I'm just going to take a quick drink. Yeah, I made a few discoveries along the course of my career as I was plowing through some AWS training one day. I was listening to a guy and he was saying like, oh, AWS, S3, yeah, it's great. And it's storage, it's this, it's that, versioning, lifecycle control, blah, 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 blah. And then he dropped this bombshell that, oh, S3 can be used to host a static site. And I was just like, what? Can it? I know people put assets on there, but I didn't think it could serve HTML. And he used the example of a microsite that he built for a Lord of the Rings promo. And being a massive Lord of the Rings nerd, I just went, oh, I'll have a bit of that. What's going on there? I'll listen to this bit. And yeah, it turns out you can turn an S3 bucket into a static web host. And it can withstand a shitload of traffic being thrown at it. So as of 2018, the official docs were that it can handle 5,500 requests per second for any asset you put in an S3 bucket. That's GET requests on an S3 bucket. Really, really like high traffic stuff. That's not to mention if you put a CloudFront distribution in front of it, it can do even more. Anyway, that was discovery number one. Discovery number two. So a friend of mine asked for a revamp of his WordPress site in about 2018. And I was looking at alternatives to WordPress, but I ended up going with WordPress because he knew how to use WordPress. And yeah, anyway, long story short, I came across Gatsby, version 1 of Gatsby, and it builds itself as a static site generator. It uses React, so you can program in languages, you know, like that you're familiar with, JavaScript, TypeScript, and it spits out all the pages at build time. There's a whole plugin architecture, much the same as WordPress. And the big sell for me was that it optimizes all of your code and your static assets and so on at build time. So you get things like responsive images, you get tree shaking, all that good stuff. You don't ship any more than you actually need. And it's all built into this tool called Gatsby, which I was like, whoa, that's pretty impressive. take a look at that. So I built a version of his site in Gatsby, and then he came around one night and panicked, and we just went, let's do it in WordPress. Come on, let's keep it easy. I'm going to be maintaining this forever, and you're causing me too much stress. So anyway, that was one thing I was like, but that was really interesting. And then the third discovery I made was this book. It's called, officially called the Jamstack book on Netlify. It's more of a pamphlet. Seriously, I read this on a flight from Barcelona to the UK back when you could travel, like 20 years ago now. But this.
Rob speaking.
Pardon? Sorry, Rob. He's muted himself. Cool. Sorry. Yeah. So this book blew my mind. So I think this was probably the most important discovery that I made out of all of these 3 discoveries. It's like, oh, because I was originally just going to put like a single page HTML upon S3. You know, I'd faffed around with Gatsby a bit, but this book kind of changed the way I thought about web development. So rather than it being a request and response and you generate your pages on the server and spit it all back and whatnot, this book introduced an idea of, hey, build all your pages on your CI environment and spit them all out as HTML. I was like, hang on, what? That'd be really scalable and really cool, right? And yeah, and it talked through a case study which Netlify had built, or had rebuilt, sorry, the Smashing Magazine website. So they talked about how they got their page load time down from, I think it was 8 seconds to 80 milliseconds, something like that. It's crazy, just by using techniques of building the pages up front and then shipping them. And it blew my mind. So let's just leave it there. I can't say any more than that. Go and read this book and be like, actually, yeah, that's a really cool idea. So this book talks about what's called the Jamstack. And the Jamstack's a pretty crappy name, I think, for a great set of technologies. It's basically JavaScript APIs and markup, or markdown, as the book talks about. But there's a load of stuff in JavaScript, sorry, not JavaScript, in the Jamstack that isn't written in JavaScript. It's got a static site generator called Hugo, for example, which is written in Go. So you know, the JavaScript, apparently I read, is referring to the JavaScript in the browser. So it's like, well, it's, yeah, whatever. Anyway, it's a marketing gimmick and a bit of a naff name, but look beyond the name, you'll find some really cool ideas. And one of those ideas is Markdown as content. So the book talked about having people write Markdown, storing it alongside your website in your Git repository, and then having a build transform that Markdown into HTML, which, okay, is not the best user experience. If you're a content editor, for example, you might be like, why do I need to learn Markdown? You know, it's hard. I need an exclamation mark and brackets for an image, and no thanks. As a developer, you're probably fine with that. It's like, yeah, everyday syntax. I do it on GitHub, blah, blah, blah. But the idea is you're moving your content to where your code is, and you can version control your content. And so what was born was a set of tools that, you know, the CMSs as well now that generate this markdown content. So I'll show you a demo in a second about how this works. But the idea is that you have a CMS which commits to your Git repository. Again, I was like, why didn't I think of that? That's a really cool idea. And then your build process transforms that markdown into HTML. So the whole static site generation process looks a little bit like this. So you've got your developers sat there, might be writing code, they might be using Gatsby, they might be using different products like Next.js or Eleventy, or Hugo, as I mentioned before, or Jekyll, even if you're into Ruby. Have to be really into Ruby though. You write your code, you commit it to your version control, and that will trigger your build, hopefully. Your CI server will kick in. Builds can be triggered other ways. We'll talk about that in a bit. The build will then pull all your HTML and your markdown files together and generate statically rendered pages into a Git. Sorry, is that Vincenzo? Sorry. Hey man. Didn't recognize you, sorry. Yeah, it will then generate all your pages into a directory, and you just upload that directory to S3, to Netlify, to any web host, and sit back and enjoy. I hope you all appreciated that animation, by the way. And then you can put a CDN in front of that bucket, that host, whatever, and it's just serving static assets as it would, you know, a JavaScript file, a CSS file, an image. You're actually serving the pages from CDN. And honestly, it feels so performant and so rapid. So yeah, so I hope you like the timely election slide there, title, sorry, of the slide. You get a lot of wins out of this. You get massive performance wins, because all the code you're shipping is exactly what is needed to run that web page or that website. You can you strip out all the unused CSS. You can take advantage of all the great tools like CSS in JS and style components, all that good stuff, to just ship exactly what the browser needs. You get major performance gains because it's behind a CDN. You get security gains. Now, this is a really key one. Like, how often do you have to patch a WordPress site or update PHP, or install a new version of Umbraco or something with some security fixes? You don't have to worry about any of that. There's no security issues as such. Any dynamic aspects to your site, you can farm those out to Amazon, to Auth0, etc., to third parties, to Stripe even. All these payment providers and so on and so forth will provide you client libraries, and they worry about the security of your site and your payment process, etc. So there's such a reduced attack vector. It's great. You get massive scalability wins because you're no longer generating pages on the server side. You're behind a CDN. So that's most CDNs are global, so it's hugely scalable. And portability, not that a lot of people would choose to move web hosts, but if you want to, say, downgrade from your AWS S3 bucket to, I don't know, Vida host or some FTP server that you run somewhere, you can do that because it's just HTML. It's great. So how do you tackle the dynamic aspects of a static website? Now, naturally, it's all in the browser, so you're going to have to use JavaScript, so hence the J in Jamstack. But Netlify, one of my favorite hosts, they provide wrappers around things like serverless functions. So you just have to say, fetch me this path, and the path is relative to your code base, but it's actually created in the background. It's created you an AWS Lambda function, and you can call out to APIs as you normally would, etc., etc. So yeah, that's how you handle the dynamic aspects of this kind of thing. And tools like Gatsby provide you built-in mechanisms to do that. Gatsby is really great for querying APIs at build time as well. We'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, you might have a checkout process, or form submissions, user authentication. You can drop all of this in client side. There's AWS Amplify has some great examples of this. Auth0 is got 200,000 sites using their client-side authentication. So it's a serverless authentication model. You're not maintaining any infrastructure or updating any versions of software on your servers, or having to worry about PII and all that kind of stuff and security breaches. They handle all that for you. You just drop in a few lines and configure it, and it's great. It's wonderful. So I'm racing a little bit, sorry. You also get CMSs as well. It's not particularly pertaining to the Jamstack as such. It's a new breed of CMS called the headless CMS. It's not a new idea, but there's a lot of new tools springing up that are designed with this use case specifically in mind. So Contentful is a great example of that. WordPress have just released a headless mode and a GraphQL API, I believe. So if you're that way inclined, you can use WordPress to generate your static site as well. WordPress is the back-end content management. Front end is all Gatsby or some other static site generator that can read that headless API. Netlify CMS is a little bit different, but it works with Markdown, and I'll show you that in a second. But All of these CMSs are great. You're not limited to what they provide out of the box. So like pages and posts, as you get with WordPress, you can define your content types generally in JSON, in YAML, or in some other configuration language. So because I work at the BBC, I thought I'd give you a demo and use a Blue Peter logo. So here's one I made earlier. So before I do that, if you do want to know some more, go to jamstack.org and look at the massive, massive list of static site generators that you can get. So 11T I know is popular. React Static's another one. VuePress uses Vue. Nuxt, I think, uses Vue as well. Jekyll, as I mentioned before, Gatsby, Hugo, and Next. There's tons, and there's tons of resources on this site particularly, which are really, really good. So I've got what's called a Gatsby starter running, although it's not running right now. I'm just going to fire it up in a second. But basically, a lot of these static site generators give you a scaffolded project. So the one I'm going to show you is just a basic blog. And I'm going to start, I'll just show you what's in there. It's a pretty standard React app. So you've got your source code, you've got a content directory, but you've got some other files like Gatsby config, Gatsby browser, etc., etc. I'm just going to run the Gatsby develop process, which is going to spin up a local development server. If you've used Create React App, it's very similar to that. Any kind of other local node kind of development environments is similar to, it's the same sort of thing. This is the part where it doesn't work, right? Come on. It's not normally this slow. Oh, phew, it's starting. So it's parsing all the config. It's loading the plugins. It's creating schemas, all this good stuff. You see there, it's created some pages for me. It's building the development bundle. It's doing its thing. And this, there we go. So like in any good tooling, it tells you where it's running. It also gives me a GraphQL explorer for the data that's pulled. And I'll just show you what the site looks like. It's nothing exciting. I say I haven't written this. This is somebody else's stuff. So yeah, this is standard blog. And we're going to look at some code now. So please do sing up if you can't see the code. So I just want to talk you through a few things about this. Can you all see that? Is it big enough? Yeah, it's a thumbs up from Paul. Yep. Cool. Okay, so this is just a standard kind of JSON config, but you can define some site metadata like who built it. And I say all this came for free by just cloning a repo, which is this. It's called Gatsby Starter blog, I think it's called. But he's installed a lot of plugins. So one thing Gatsby can do is source stuff from the file system. You tell it where. So it's getting stuff from the content blog folder. There's a plugin called Transformer Remark. So that's the bit that's doing the markdown to HTML. And we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a second. There's some analytics in there and other bits and pieces. So the only thing that I've added that's different to what you'd get if you cloned this now is Netlify CMS. And that's just because I want to show you a little bit more of what the CMS sort of integration can look like. So Gatsby is just a standard React app. So you have this source directory, the components directory you add. The only thing that's special about it is this pages folder. So any JavaScript file or React component you drop in this directory will get turned into a page. So as I say, just to reiterate, this is not my code, this is somebody else's, but I just want to talk you through what's going on here. So it's a pretty standard React component. It's a functional component that just returns something, some JSX. And as you see, it's just the blog. So it's got a bio component, which maps to this little bit here. And then it's looping over these posts here. And how do we get those posts? This is a static page, right? How is that happening? How are we getting those posts into the page? So all those posts are stored as markdown here. So there's a new post, which is one I overwrote yesterday, which I forgot to clear out. There's hello world, there's my second post. And these are just markdown files. There's nothing too exciting about these. This little block at the top here is just metadata about markdown. It's called front matter. And then you've got just your standard markdown stuff in the middle there. So a good example is this file. It's huge. Where is it? Sorry, the Hello World one. It's got all your good markdown stuff. So if we take a look at that in the browser, it looks like this. It's been rendered out. It's been transformed from markdown to HTML, which is great. And so what's going on here is that when Gatsby kicks in and that build process runs, anything you export as a GraphQL query, it will stick into this page, because this is why this page directory is so special. It's going to run this query at build time, and the results of this query, which I'll show you in a second, get dumped into this component as a prop, so the data prop. So all the results, so we're querying for the site metadata, which is coming from that config file that I showed you, and then it's using this plugin called all markdown remark, looking in the directory and pulling out all the markdown files it finds, grabbing some excerpt fields, a slug field, and then the front matter, that metadata that I showed you. And the results of that query at build time are going to get dropped into this component. And so you can access those just through this data prop, and then you can build as you would any other React component. So let's show you what that query looks like in the GraphQL Explorer. I didn't want to live code anything because there's too much to go wrong. So we've got our GraphQL Explorer here. Let's delete that query. I'll paste that in again, prettify that off. And so it's the same query that the Gatsby site is running, but the only difference is it runs it at build time, whereas in, say, a PHP environment, you do this on the server side, you say, get me something by ID, loop through the directories, etc., etc. And what it's doing, it's using that all markdown remark, as I said before, and that markdown remark plugin is configured to look at the directory on the file system and pull out anything in a markdown file and transform it. So you're getting all that good stuff for free. So yeah, and then what happens is that gets dumped back into your component, and you can go away and do some cool stuff with that. So that's one way of creating pages in Gatsby. You get that out of the box. It's just how it works. The other way requires a little bit more legwork, but if you look at, there's a file called Gatsby node, and this file is another file that gets pulled in at build time and run. So what happens is Gatsby will pull this file in, it'll look through here, and if there's any calls to this create pages API, there's other APIs you can hook into, but create pages is the main one that they sort of sell. And what's going to happen here is you can do another query if you like, or you can pull data from another API, for example, and create pages as a result of that. So what's going on here, where we're pulling out a template to use. So we're going to say, hey, I've got a component called a blog post, which is just another React component here. Again, it takes a data prop, and we're going to run this query here. So what it's going to do is going to grab all the nodes, so every markdown file we've got, and it's going to try and create a page off of those programmatically. So the results of these query is results data all markdown remark nodes. So I'll just show you what that query looks like. So it's looking through, it's found me a hello world, second slug, and post ID, another post as well. So it's going to go through that array, and for each page, so for each entry in that array, it's going to call this create page method, which is internal to Gatsby, and it's going to pass it a path that we want to use. So it's a slug that's coming from here, hello world. It's going to pass it a component, which is the template you just saw, the blog post template, and it's going to pass it some context, an ID, and some data for the page as well, some other bits and pieces. We won't worry too much about that. But what's going to happen is on your build, on your CI or on your local server, that's going to run every time there's a change, and it's going to generate pages. And it's really, that's where the power of this stuff really comes into its own. So yeah, so this is looped through and it's created all those pages as Gatsby does, and that's all fine. So that's good. That's one way of doing it. I'm just going to show you another way to create pages. So this is Netlify CMS. So this, as I said before, you can get these CMSs that work really well with the Jamstack. So this is going to create a markdown file in my Git repository. So at the moment, in this Git repository I've got here, you can go and nick this code if you want. There's 3 posts. And what's going to happen, there's going to be a new post created here now. So if I say world, I'm going to say that's now. And as you can see, it's previewing it. You can do all sorts of stuff to customize the layout of this. And it's going to publish that up, and it's going to commit and push to GitHub. So this is running on my local host, or it might be running on a host. And hopefully if I refresh this page, where's that gone? Oh, it's called Hello World, isn't it? Sorry. Bad example. Let me, I've probably just broken the other one. Oh, I've screwed it properly now. Oh, damn it, gods, no. Let me delete and start again. I've made a right mess there, sorry. Told you, live coding, it's not good. It should commit a post. This was seamless yesterday when I tried this out at work. There we go. So it's created another post in there. Pick a better name than Hello World, James, lesson learned. But what that's done is it's pushed that file up to GitHub. Okay, so there's the raw markdown you get out of this, you get out of that CMS. It's nothing particularly fancy, but it gives somebody who's not a developer, who doesn't know Markdown, a nice way to look at Markdown files. So that nothing's happened here, nothing's been regenerated. And that's because there's been no changes to my source code at all. So my development server is still running, but if I do a pull, what's going to happen is, imagine you've just committed source control. There you go. It's pulled down my post. It's deleted one that I should have cleared up earlier, and said, hey, it's deleted one. It's created a new one, and my Gatsby site's kicked in and gone, hey, there was a change there. So this is your CI server kicking in and going, hey, we've got changes. Let's rebuild. And there you go. It's rebuilt this another post for the win. So that's the one I've just built. That's what you should have seen. And I've just destroyed. Oh no, I haven't destroyed. The other page is still there. So that's all good. So that's the demo out of the way. That went terribly, but hey. Cool. So I like to try and balance my presentations a little bit because I've been very one-sided, very pro this approach so far. But when might not this work? So when, did that sound right? I don't know. Anyway, so things that work well with Gatsby and static sites, and things that might not really work well. So if you've ever used the React docs, or the TypeScript docs, you've come across a statically generated site before. So they're great for doc sites, intranets, e-commerce pages. The Sainsbury's homepage is generated like this. Smashing Magazine, as I said before, that was all written for them by the guys at Netlify, and the case study is the Jamstack book of Smashing Magazine. Job boards is great, sports team pages. Every time you're making a change, it's going to do a new build and generate your content and ship it out to a CDN. So it's really, really good for that. The only things I can think that you'd really struggle with this is like high volume e-commerce pages. So perhaps very.co.uk for those of you from very on the call. But you could do portions of the site. It's not to say you can't do the whole site. You could do, say, your help pages or some other pages, and start to bring it in that way. And social networks, I think they're probably not a great fit for social networks, just because of the high turnover and variation in content. Sykes Cottages, Rory, I'm sure you could build this in Gatsby one day.
Yeah, one day.
And betting and gambling sites, I think that this probably might not work for them. It's probably still that need to respond and generate new pages quite quickly on the server side. But that's not to say it couldn't be done. There are some interesting benchmarks out there, which I'll talk about now. So there's a great report, which I'll just jump to, and you can find that off my my link shortener there. But this guy called Sean Davis, he wrote up a great post about comparing the build times of these. So it's not, again, it's not the render times or the performance on the client so much anymore. The problem shifted way left to your build of like how many pages can I build and how quick. So he works for an agency that do a lot of work with static site generators. So he picked 6 of the sort of the most popular ones and went through and compared them. So he built a standard markdown to HTML converter as a prototype, and he built it in 11T, Hugo, Jekyll, Next, and Gatsby. And he published the results over on this other site I'll show you in a second. But he kind of hypothesizes about what the speeds might look like, and it was roughly right. So as you can see here, the number of files you get, so up to 1,000 files. Hugo's generating 1,000 pages in 300 milliseconds there. Gatsby is going to take you about 22 seconds to do 1,000 pages. That's a pretty big site, 1,000 pages. So yeah, the difference being Hugo hasn't got a lot of the functionality that Gatsby has. So that's why there's such a big difference, as you'll see in a second. Hugo's mainly focused on kind of transforming Markdown into pages, whereas Gatsby, you can pull stuff in from the APIs and so on and so forth, and do loads of response. It does lots of sort of image crunching and resizing and whatnot. Whereas on a 64,000 page site, Hugo did that in 23 seconds. Gatsby took 900 minutes. I don't know what that, roughly about 15 minutes. But for 32,000 files, you're still looking at around 5 minutes for the build time. But that's not to say there's not an awful lot of things you can do to speed that up. So Gatsby have recently introduced something called incremental builds. So what this is, you can trigger sites via, trigger builds via webhooks, obviously. So if you've got a CMS that every time you change the content, it pings your CI server and says, hey, kick off this build. Gatsby will only, if you use an incremental build, will only change what the files that have actually changed. So it'll only rebuild what's changed, sorry. So that's a way of it massively improving the performance. And there's a graph on this page somewhere where, yeah, you get sub 10 seconds for each content change, which is great. And that's probably including deployment as well. So I just want to show you another couple more examples of static sites. Have a look at that. This is Netlify. So yeah, this heuristic Luminaire site is a, so if you've ever heard of Wes Boss, the JavaScript guy, he builds this site. So this is a course he takes you through building. This is all statically rendered. The address is gatsby.pizza. So this content's all coming from a CMS called Sanity, which is headless. It's got a GraphQL API in the front of it. And yeah, so this pizza menu, look at it's absolutely rapid. It's jumping around a bit, but it's, you know, you can click through. All these pages are generated up front, and he takes you through the entire course. It's 50% off that course at the moment, Black Friday deal, if you're interested. And it's called Master Gatsby, and it's really worth doing. He teaches you how to generate this. All this pagination is generated on build time as well. So you've got to do the, how many pages have I got? How many am I displaying per page? Those kind of calculations at build time. But as you can see down here, this was a report I ran a couple of days ago for this very site. Out of the box, the performance is rapid. You get all these best practices built in. It's all winning in terms of accessibility and SEO and stuff because it's pre-generated HTML. It's amazing. Stackbit, if you want to dip your toe in, there's a site called Stackbit where, for example, if you've got a Medium blog or something like that, you can import that Medium blog directly into Stackbit, or it'll spin up a certain type of static site for you. It's really, really cool piece of kit as a site builder and all sorts. I mentioned a couple of other static site generators. There's Hugo. If you're a fan of Go, this is the one that's super quick, super rapid. And then you've got 11T as well, which is a sort of the JavaScript competitor to Hugo, which doesn't have as many features as Gatsby, from what I'm led to believe. I've not used this myself, but it's, again, it fared really well in the build stuff here. So that was doing, 136 seconds for 64,000 pages. That was doing some really cool stuff there. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is sourcing data from other APIs. So if I used to contract, and this was my little contracting company's website. I wanted to make me appear bigger than I was, and not just a one-man band. I'm a whole freaking team, man. And so what this is, this is a Gatsby site again, but these blog posts are all on Medium. And so when my build kicks in and runs, this is pulling from medium.com. So what's happening here is my build process is reading Medium's RSS feed of my blog, and then it's creating this, it's bringing all that data from Medium into my build process, and I'm able to then create pages on my build from Medium. So that's a really good example, I think, of using data from other sites of how to create pages on your site. And there's a good example in this project where he queries an API. Yeah, and so he queries this API. There's 140 odd beers, and he's pulling data from APIs and building pages off of that. It's a really, really powerful idea. As I say, I probably only just touched the tip of the iceberg with what you can do with this kind of stuff. There's some really big users of Gatsby and other static site generators. So like I say, React, Nike have done stuff, Figma, all that kind of, there's quite a lot of stuff out there, Braun, loads of places using this tooling, and it's a cool world to be working in, I have to say. We've actually just built one at the BBC. We use Create React App, so not Gatsby. I was a bit gutted about that, but hey. But yeah, it's so powerful, and it's so simple to work with. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to show at the moment. If you'd like to know some more, here's some phrases I would suggest you Google. Has anyone got any questions, comments? I realize that was quite rapid.
I had some questions, James, but you kept answering them along the way, which was really annoying. A bit rude of you, to be honest. Yeah, I was right. I had about 5 questions, and then you just kept saying, you went on to incremental builds, and I was like, right, I'm out of questions. So nice one. But no, it's good. It's good. And yeah. Awesome. I was gonna ask about personalization, because that's like, but you did give examples of like where you wouldn't really apply it, and yeah, the big kind of kind of online shopping store that's an example of one that I would have thought would have been a bit of a problem, and where you need to do like large scale kind of A/B testing and that kind of thing. I guess it becomes a bit of a problem then, and personalization is the obvious one as well.
Yeah, I think it depends on like how much of you want to push this. I think it's possible. Let's say there's some benchmarks where Gatsby is generating paid sites with 300,000 pages, that kind of thing. But it's a trade-off, isn't it? It's like, do you want to go down that route and push it and push it and push it, or do you want to stick to what you know a little bit more and go with like the your Oracle Commerces of this world and you Magentos, that kind of thing, that are more suited to it out of the box. Whereas I think it's not to say it's not possible, but it's, as I say, it's a trade-off. I think it depends as well on like how many images are on the site. So as I say, Gatsby does a lot of image processing. So on your build time, one thing I didn't really show was in this. Can you still see my screen? Am I still sharing?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. This image here, there's several variations of this image being created on the build process. So you can see here, it's wrapped it in a load of HTML, which you may object to or whatever, but it's created a base 64 version of it. You've got 600 pixels all the way up to 2000 pixels version. It's created an entire source set of that image on the build. So that's one of the things that will slow your builds down. But if you haven't got lots of builds, it might be a good choice for you. If you haven't got lots of images, it might be a good choice for you.
Yeah, I believe Next also do incremental, because Next can support both server-side and static pages, can't it? So, and I believe that Next has also got incremental builds. I've never played with it, but yeah, I played with Gatsby in the previous place, and we had similar kind of success. Really fast end products, really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really liking it. So I need a project now.
Yeah.
Hey James, have you actually tried hosting a Gatsby site on S3? Because I did try this earlier in the year and I gave up. I couldn't get it to work properly. I ended up just going with normal CSS and HTML site.
Yes, yeah, there is a way to do it. You've got the trick is to set both the index document and the error document to index.html on S3 on your S3 bucket. So here, this slide here, your index document is and then your error document. But if you set those both to index.html, anytime there's an error, it'll route back to the Gatsby application and the React router, and that'll pick it up. Whereas that error document is, I don't know, just
yeah, so I did just get errors and I didn't try.
So that's
gave up on it.
Yeah, so I have been able to do it, but that's the trick. It took me a while and a bit of Googling to figure that out, but yeah, it's and now they've changed the console completely of Amazon, so it doesn't look like anything like that anymore. Yeah,
might be the closer.
Any more for any more? No?
It's good, that, James. It's good.
Cool. Well, I hope you. Yeah, I say glad you enjoyed it. If you need anything, I'm on Twitter at JamesHD. If you're trying it out, I'd love to hear about it. I'm interested to see what you get up to. So yeah, Sam, back to you, mate.
Oh, that was brilliant. I really appreciate you giving us your time, James. And I'd like to thank you all for attending. We're hosting another sort of webinar on the 9th of December. We got Fran Hoy leading that one, and that one's called Revisit Unit Testing. It's going to be tough to beat today's though, James, but we'll see what you can do.
Cool.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Thank you. Excellent work, James.